before we erase this chart, I want to point out some interesting figures about population. How much of planet Earth would be the Trinitarian section of the three main limbs of the Christian Church: Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Protestant/Evangelical. What do you think is the total population of membership, just nominal membership, in those three kinds of branches of the church? Roughly speaking, 2 billion, which is how much of the planet? About a third. So you have 1/3 of the planet just in that small area. So that's, even though a lot of that is nominal, not truly born again, but just in terms of nominal membership in the word church, Christian church, by some definition, it's pretty amazing that 1/3 of our planet, with all these isms, there's that much in that one little pocket. And that's because, of course, God has done an amazing thing. The Holy Spirit's done great things in terms of getting the church to go out. And you know the history of the church. We've been very, slow in going out. And God has to kick us a few times to get us going. So even with our being disobedient and sluggish, it's amazing that even though it's a nominal figure, that much of the planet it has some kind of knowledge in connection to a Christian church by some definition. Now, if we go over here to the Unitarian side, which includes basic traditional Judaism, some cults like Oneness, which is a kind of a small cult, though it's growing quite large, Islam, especially Islam. How large is Islam, do you think, in terms of membership under the Unitarian section?
About 1.5.
Well, it's 1 billion. 1 billion, so it's 1/6. So 1/6 is just Islam, in a nominal sense. Not all are faithful Muslims, but just by name they are Muslim. So 1/6, 1/3. So what do you get there in terms of total? That's right. No. That's right. That's it. Yeah, half. So the total of Islam and Christianity, just that one area at the bottom of our chart, that's 1/2 of the planet.
Wow.
So even though we have a lot of things going on here, at least on the handout that has more things that I didn't write on here, that just that one area has half the people of planet Earth. That's pretty amazing.
Is that an indication that we're near the truth?
Well, I think it's an indication of the power of the theistic view. The power of a personal theism. That there's a God, one God, and this God is personal. So even though Islam has the wrong gospel, and of course they have the wrong God as well, but in terms of concept, there appears to be an attraction to a lot of the truth in terms of there being one God, and the one God is personal. That has drawn the attention of half the planet, at least nominally. So I find that quite striking. Of course, you can't always say, well, because we have more people than you do, our view is right and yours is wrong. Because sometimes the truth is with the one person, not the many. But that is an interesting figure, just as a fact. So we're going to erase this and go to the third handout with definitions of all these different isms. So while I'm erasing, I'll have these go out. So, is someone collecting the extras back there somewhere? Okay, please collect the extras, and I'll get those after the class.
I have an extra 2B.
2B?
Yes, sir.
Or not to be, that was the question. Ooh, where is the extra? Do I have an extra? I have one extra there. Okay, here comes 2C. Okay, under the first main heading, atheism, just a few examples. We're not going to look at every one of these. Read these on your own when you get home as part of your assignment. Read the whole and read all the notes all over again. But here are a few examples. We have to look at naturalism because naturalism is a very important part of American life. Naturalism. Reality is only physical/material, and is subject to the law of the jungle/nature. That's fairly simple. If life is only particles, then particles go the way particles go. There is no right or wrong. Things just happen because it's the law of the jungle. Survival of the fittest. The law of evolution, so-called. Whatever can adapt the best makes it. Those that can't adapt, they die out. Life is cruel in this view. So cold and cruel. Cold and cruel world. Empiricism, very similar. True reality is only what can be empirically or five senses verified. So what are the five senses? Taste, touch, smell, see, and hear. So if you can't see it or smell it or touch it, it's not real. So that means there's no God. At least no Yahweh, according to them. Because you can't smell God, can't see God. Or can you?
Yes.
How about the gospel? Again, we have these choices in our forks in the road, and yet it's also a little bit the other side too. So once again, in a way, God can be seen and heard and touched and smelled. How's that?
It's a creation.
Creation?
In the Bible.
Where in the Bible can we really, plainly and literally, touch God, see God and hear God and smell God, eat fish with God? So God the Son became flesh, in a way, because God is kind of like visible now in flesh, in Jesus Christ. Now you, in a way, can see God and hear God and touch God. So again, God is bigger than our conceptions. We think we got God figured out, and He does these strange things like incarnation. But before that, God could not be, in His essence, touched or heard or smelled. But yeah, we have an answer for empiricism in surprising ways. In some ways we can say, okay, we can show you God that you can see and touch. His name is Jesus. Okay, here's a strange one. We're going to skip one there. We're going to look at epiphenomenalism. That will really impress your friends. When you go to your next party, your church party, you got your root beer, your popcorn, you're just kind of mingling. So, what's your view of epiphenomenalism? If you're a pastor, there'll be a church meeting very soon, and you better pack your bags. You're out of there. So make sure you finish your popcorn before you do that, okay? Otherwise you won't get to finish your popcorn. So what is epiphenomenalism besides being a funny word? It says thoughts. Now this is really a serious view, but it is laughable in a way, but to us as Christians, but this is a serious view. People think, who are atheistic, because there's no God in their view, here's how they explain God, in terms of people being religious and believing in God. Here's how they explain all these half the population of the earth believing in God. They explain it this way. They say that thoughts, even God-type thoughts, are caused by physical actions, like molecules bouncing around at the microscopic level of your brain. Molecules in the brain are bouncing around, and sometimes what comes out of the bouncing around of molecules in your brain is God thoughts. That explains why people have this belief in God. Now can you think of a good challenge to that? A good criticism of that view? These are physical molecules, atoms, physical matter. First of all, do molecules have minds? Not that we know of. Now, we do have brains that have lots of molecules and atoms, and brains do think. But the problem is, no one yet knows how, really, the brain thinks. In fact, the more people have studied the brain, the more they find out that the brain is like a computer. Do computers think? What do computers do? Okay, they store, they send information, they store it, they process it, they categorize it. But what does the computer need to think? He's a programmer, a user, a guider, the one who tells that, if this is a computer, there's something needed to point this in a direction. Like, go this way, look this way, jump, think about pizza. Okay, brain, I went to a party last year. What's the name of that girl I met? Okay, brain, think that direction. The brain has to have something to make it think about the girl at a party last year. Okay, how would the brain choose that as a specific thing? And how do you know how to do all the things in life instantaneously if this has no ordered guide to help it to know what to think about now, what to think about tomorrow, and have it all fit into a coherent whole, So really, people are finding out that the brain is not enough by itself in terms of physical particles to do what it does. So a computer has to have a typer and a programmer and a user, or it won't do anything meaningful. So that's why physical matter, even if it does bounce around, why would physical matter all of a sudden have a spiritual idea? Because this is so different from that. Just like it's like this. How would a turtle ever think about Mars? Turtles have a limited framework. They can think about fish, they can think about water, they can think about, I'm hungry, but Mars is too far beyond their world, their conceptual ability. In the same way, how could physical matter ever have even the idea of a spiritual realm, the concept spirit, which is totally the opposite of matter? So, but you see, what is this really showing us? Isn't it showing us desperation? When you don't have a God concept, but there are people who believe in God, you have to have a way to explain that without having God there to explain it. So they go to such extreme measures that are very desperate looking, such as, the poor balls in your head, the molecules, just sometimes produce these freaky thoughts like God concepts. Well, okay, if that's one view, but it's a pretty unlikely, improbable explanation for why you have half the planet who believe in a personal being. But that's epiphenomenalism. A lot of you should know by now, and if you've had my classes before, I think you know it for sure, macroevolutionism. What is that a complement of? Macro as opposed to micro. Okay. I don't have micro on here because micro is a universal fact. It's not really a view, it's a fact. Microevolution, for those of you who are new to that term, microevolution, okay, someone who has not had my classes before, can someone please tell us, what is microevolution? James.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's basically how species sometimes mutate and therefore change.
Change into what?
Into something very similar to what it is.
Okay, so the species stays the same species, but it just changes within itself? That's right. So microevolution is that I'm a human species, of the human species, and I have changed, and I can change in small ways, but I'm always a human. I have evolved from a baby to an adult. So I got from this size to this size. But I'm still human at that size, I'm human that size, I'm human that size. That's microevolution. Perhaps if I chew on bones all my life, I eat raw meat and chew on bones, then my DNA will pass on gradually over time to my children and children's children if I have children. If I'm always eating bony things and tough meat, I'm sure that over time the DNA will be manufactured slowly and adapt to that, and you'll have future children who have stronger teeth because there's been a pattern of the teeth needing to have that strength to chew bone and gristle. But those future children will still be humans. That's microevolution. This is a fact, scientific fact, not a theory. This is fact. But I'm putting here a theory. Macro. What is macro?
From the goo to you by way of the zoo.
From the zoo to you by way of the goo?
No, from the goo to you by way of the zoo.
Okay, from the goo to you by way of the zoo. Or what do you do? I like that. From the zoo to you by way of the goo. That's very good. Okay. Yeah, of course what that means is about, being so comical is that, humans can jump the ship and become non-human. Okay? Or pigeons can jump the ship and become non-pigeons. Okay? So, but that's totally theory. Nothing at all that's factual, and I think it never will be. But that is the view. So it says there, all living things are due to random natural processes that are able to jump species and supposedly improve. Okay, skip a couple there, or skip one. You should know that there are two kinds of Buddhism. Two kinds of Buddhism. Now, the kind you usually see is not this one. This is also funny. A funny characteristic about humankind. Buddha is under what main heading there? What is the dark print term? Atheism. Do you realize that Buddha is an atheist? This is a major religion. We usually think religion being about a God kind of a thing, right? But here you have a large part of the world who calls himself Buddhist, and if they follow Buddha, the original Buddhist, they're atheist or agnostic at best. So it says there, suffering is the essence of life. I don't think Buddha invented the smiley face. I don't think that he did that. Suffering is the essence of life. Okay, he did invent the unsmiley face. Okay, here's the symbol for Buddhism. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but he did believe that the essence of life is suffering. Now, in some ways, he's right. I took a seminar. I thought it'd be kind of a joke seminar. I was a missionary. I had to go to it. The topic was, what is happiness, and how long have we had happiness on planet Earth? And I actually was quite revealing. The speaker said that it's only been a few cultures lately that have experienced much of happiness. In America, we believe it's our constitutional right. We have the right to liberty, and how does it go? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's our right. I'm going to be happy or I'm going to be angry. I demand my being happy. Okay? So we're born thinking we should be happy, and quite a few of us are happy, even as non-Christians, by God's common grace. But he pointed out, the speaker, that in most of the world's history, most cultures have had very little of happiness. It's been just survival. And people had short lifespans for much of history. They worked hard, they worked hard to survive, and they died young. And people had, people in Africa, oh man, if you know about Africa, Africa has had nothing but misery for centuries. There are very few happy Africans in terms of having a lot of happiness. So he pointed out that we are spoiled in history, that America has as much happiness as it does in our short history, that we are the aberration. So Buddha, in some ways, has it right, that much of life really is suffering, which again points to the evidence for what? In terms of the Bible's teaching, this is evidence for the fall and the curse. That would be evidence that there really was a fall and a curse. That's why there's so much misery, because we are under a curse. So this is a truthful thing, that much of life really is suffering. And self-control, now here's where it becomes not of God. Self-control is the goal of life. The goal is to cease reincarnations and enter so-called nirvana, which is kind of like a sleep state, where you just kind of relax and you're kind of numb, okay, forever and ever. No more suffering. That's Buddhism, called Theravada Buddhism. If you look down in your sheet, where do I have the other?
Mahayana?
Under polytheism, next to the last, that's Mahayana Buddhism. And this is the majority Buddhism. Most Buddhists are this one. Look at this. Look at the difference. Buddha didn't believe in God or wasn't sure there was a God. Here, under Mahayana Buddhism, do you see it there? Under polytheism, next to last heading. Seeking help for self-control from higher beings who have delayed nirvana entry in order to help. So beings who became like Buddha, so supposedly, they forewent entering this numb, peaceful state called nirvana, and they chose to stay back from that to help out other pilgrims on their journey of becoming good enough to enter nirvana. And so they are really gods.
These beings are people we can see and pay.
They're personal beings. They're higher than us. They're greater than us. They're like souls who have qualified to enter nirvana, but chose not to enter nirvana, but to help us who are lower than them. So they really function like lots of different gods. So if you go to a Buddhist temple, you'll usually see this kind of Buddhism with little figurines of little human-type beings. And they light candles, they pray to them, because those are what they call what's that term? Bodhisattvas. A very strange word. They are called bodhisattvas. And they are these godlike beings who used to be like us, but they've reached a higher level. If you know about rock and roll music, there's an album by Steely Dan, and they have a song called Bodhisattva. So you can also learn about that from the song a little bit. Okay. Is there a question? I saw a hand somewhere.
I was
Jason?
From what you said earlier a couple of classes ago, it sounded kind of contradictory where you don't help people.
That was more Hindu.
No.
But because of the caste system. If a person's a low caste, it's because of karma. So if you help them, you're messing up their time to work out their karma. You're supposed to suffer because of their previous life. So if you help them, you're kind of screwing up their effort to get past that punishment time that they're supposed to pay their punishment by being in low caste. So that's why they don't help them, because they think that they're going to mess up their karma if they help them. So, which is really a demonic, horrible view, but that's what they're stuck with, and they have that thinking. Okay, so back under atheism, Bob earlier you asked about existentialism. Here's one definition for existentialism. About halfway down from atheism, existentialism, which is very European and very American for the last 100 years or so. There is no objective meaning in life. Therefore, humans must subjectively and responsibly shape reality in their way. Take charge and make things the way you be. It's kind of an individual thing. My existence is up to me. So I define who I am and what I am and why I'm here. So it's kind of a take charge. I'll make life the way I want it to be. If I want to wear shorts when it's hot, I'm going to wear shorts. I don't care what people think. Okay, this is a very independent kind of thinking. It's very American. It's very European. I'll do what I want to do the way I want to do it. So that's kind of a simple way of saying existentialism. It's also very American. The next one, pragmatism. This is very American. What works or accomplishes human goals is the supreme value in meaning of life. The ends justify the means. You know, that's what cheating is. Cheating is pragmatic. It works. You'll get a high grade if you cheat, if you don't get caught. It works. So you know, today they've taken surveys of kids in school. They find out that the majority of kids, according to the survey, they cheat. You know, elementary school, junior high, high school, college, they cheat. They ask them why they do it. Because it works. It's pragmatic. Now, in the same way, people go to idols and images in other religions because sometimes it works. They go to the witch doctor. Sometimes it works. They get better. They get healed. So, why do they go? It works. You tell them it's wrong, and they don't care because they're pragmatic. I don't care if it's wrong in some concept, intellectual concept. I don't care if it's right or wrong. Some cultures are pragmatic. What they want is what actually works. They don't want theory. They want action. Okay? So, Americans are also like that in many ways. Americans want results, don't they? Businesses want results. I want to make money. So if selling pornography brings in money, it works. I'm in this business to make money. And if you look at these stores now, don't look too carefully, but 7-Elevens and things like that, they have tons of pornography. Before you had to go to these dark alley places and get a paper bag to hide it in, and make sure no one saw you and get your pornography. But now, you go anywhere and they got tons of it because they make lots of money. Pragmatic. Pragmatic. Isn't that American? Bottom line, it works, okay? Hedonism. Here's American one too. Hedonism. Next to last under atheism. Hedonism. Hedonism is very American today. Personal human pleasure and avoidance of pain is the supreme value in life, the good life. I want to be comfortable. I want to have fun. What's that song by Sheryl Crow? Like, I want to have fun. Driving to Santa Monica in the car on the freeway. What's the chorus? I want to have fun. Something like that. All I want to do is have some fun. That's hedonism. Isn't that a lofty, noble worldview? All I want to do is have some fun. But isn't that very common? Even for church members. All I want to do is have some fun.
Yeah, they shout, right? Give them the organ. They go.
Okay, under agnosticism, you have, let's go to the third one, relativism. We're living today in a relativistic world, very much so. And accepting of any created view as being as true as any other, therefore accepting each view as equally true. Can you guess what relativists are not relative about?
Reality. Christianity.
Yeah, any view like Christianity that's not relative, they're not relative about. So it's impossible to be relative all the time. So you cannot be a pure relativist because there are things they don't like and they don't think is equal to their view. So you cannot really practice that consistently. So if you critique that with those C letters, you would say it's not compatible. You can't live it. You cannot live a life that's always relative. What about when you cross the street? Is that relative? It doesn't matter if you cross looking or not looking, or when buses are coming or no buses. Yeah, relativists cannot live with their view. It's unlivable because they're not relative when they cross the street. And they're not relative when they hear preaching that Jesus is the only way. They don't say, well, that's as good a view as mine. No, they don't say that. They don't live that way. Drinking rat poison is not as good as drinking milk. So you can't live it. This is an unlivable view. But they think they can do it, but they can't. Polytheism. This first one I want to comment on, animism. I said before in certain classes, and you may hear this lots of times from me, because I spent a lot of time in the animistic world, and I come back to America and I see things in America I didn't see before. And also in my study of world religions, I also see, I think animism is the world's #1 religion. But the reason why we don't usually list it in books is because it's usually hiding in other religions. Because, and also I've done research on this, and it seems to bear out that most Christians are animistic Christians, most Buddhists are animistic Buddhists, most Muslims are animistic Muslims. That's also a statistical evidence, not just speculation. What is animism? A belief in, contact with, different beings or spirits through special rituals, objects, people, etc., for gaining power, goods, or blessings, or whatever. So, for example, if you look at all the world in terms of Christianity, the generic nominal Christianity, most so-called Christians in the world, the majority, believe that if you have this in your house is blessed. Isn't that animism? That the leather and the paper and the ink, just by being in your house on the shelf, is good, and it brings blessing, brings God's favor. Isn't that animism? It's just like a magic object, okay? And there are even Christian baseball players, to be more trivial, but it makes the point. Some Christian baseball players, they have socks they wear, or a certain thing in their pocket they put, because they hit a home run one night with that thing in their pocket. And they sometimes joke about it, but sometimes you read in Sports Illustrated, they will not play baseball without that thing in their pocket. They're like, they can't do it. They can't go out in the field without that thing. That's animism. So, there are all kinds of animism. Like the Roman Catholic Church, just one more example, Roman Catholic Church. Is there a holy object that they go to Mass for that they have to have it or they don't get grace? What is that? The Eucharist. Okay, the bread and wine. Or at least the bread. Sometimes they don't get the wine at all, but the bread part. And they believe that they have to swallow that to get grace. Literally. Because that bread is who? It's plainly and literally Jesus. It's not a symbol. He is that. That is Him. Kind of like pantheism. The bread is God, and God is the bread. Okay? So they have to eat that and chew that, and they even have in their teaching, you have to grind the teeth, and swallow, and get the grace by it being in your body, physically. Okay? So that means it's a special object, like it says there, a special object that has special power. They do a special ritual. They go to special priests to give that ritual and that bread. So the Roman Catholic Mass is essentially animism. But people don't recognize it as such. They think it's Christianity, it's Bible teaching, but it's really basically animism. So most of the world is animistic, because Roman Catholics are 1 billion of the 2 billion of the mean Christian. So 1/6 of the planet, equal to the Muslim side, which is also 1 billion. 1 billion people are Roman Catholic, and if they follow the official teaching, they are essentially practicing animism without realizing it. So that's why I say, you can find the same characteristic in Islam, Christianity, Buddhism. Most people who are religious have a lot of animism in their practice and belief, and they don't realize it. Yeah.
I would say that, and isn't that because our symbols help us to understand and to teach our worldview, but then those symbols sometimes go beyond being symbols.
That's right.
And they go.
That's right. That's right. So a cross can be harmless.
Right.
And I think for us it is. It's just a reminder or a symbol or art that reminds us of Jesus Christ and what He did. But most people in the world, if they have a cross on, what does it mean to them? Yeah, it means there's power in that thing. In that mark, there's power, or God is obligated, because you wore that, He will do something, because, again, this is like panentheism also, that God is connected to that thing, and when you do that, it's like a genie rubbing the lamp. He has to do something. He has to bless you because you have that thing on. So it's kind of an animism and a panentheism, though. But and most people look at it that way, and they paint it on their wall, they paint it on their doorway to keep away evil spirits, keep away vampires or aswans or whatever these beings are in their mind, or if they are demonic, they think that cross thing has power in itself. And of course, the movies, vampire movies, we have, the vampire hunter. With the Bible, a cross, and the vampire goes, I can't touch you because you have that thing, that symbol. That's animism. Even the movies reinforce animism. Did you have a comment, Shane?
No.
Okay.
I have a comment about the rosary beads in the Catholic Church and things of that nature.
Yeah.
That was from
rosaries were invented? Hinduism. Hinduism had the first rosaries. So really that's a copy of Hinduism, having beads that you count off and you have certain...
That would be right.
Illegitimate borrowing.
Brand from the tree.
Yeah, that's an illegitimate borrowing. So really the rosary concept is really borrowing from a Hindu concept. Yeah, there's tons of animism all over the place. We just don't see it. Yeah.
Do channeling and divination come under animism?
Yes. Yeah. The occult, Ouija board, channeling, fortune tellers, astrology, those are all kind of animistic based. Yeah. Baptist churches, things like that. Back up.
Do you have a breakdown of the word animism?
It comes from, I think, the Latin, I'm not sure, animus, which means spirit or life.
Okay.
I think it's from the Latin. Is that Latin, animus? I think it's Latin. I don't think it's Greek. It might be Greek. I think it's Latin. I think it means life force. Life being. It could be a being, a living spirit, a life.
Is animus a mind or soul? Originally means doctrine or spiritual being.
Is that Latin?
It doesn't say Latin.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, panentheism, we covered that earlier, but look at this. Look at the last ism under panentheism. Neotheism. See that? Yeah. You all see that? Under panentheism, the dark heading, middle of your page, the last small print is a neotheism. See that? Mm-hmm. It's also called free will, T means theism, free will theism. It's also called openness. So it has various views. This is, I'm sorry to say, a movement within us, the evangelical segment of the church. This is a so-called semi-evangelical movement of people like us. So, for example, you've heard of Clark Pinnock? Clark. I know you've heard of Clark Kent, but this is Clark Pinnock. Okay, Clark Pinnock. He's written many books, and he used to be very evangelical. He's still somewhat evangelical, at least in the opinion of many evangelicals. He was almost removed from the Evangelical Theological Society, but he remained in. They took a vote, and he barely was allowed to stay in. But that's very debatable whether he should stay in. But he has a view that is neo-theism or free will theism or openness, and it's a growing movement within so-called evangelical circles. And what it means is this: God limits His transcendence, therefore He learns, He takes risks, and does not know all the future. Now, He would know if He chose to, in your view, but He has chosen to limit Himself. It's somewhat like what God did in God the Son did in becoming human. In Philippians 2, there is some of this where God the Son, who was eternally equal with the Father, he chose, kenosis is the Greek term, he chose to, for a period of time, lower himself, humble himself, make himself, live a life like we do, learn his ABCs or whatever, and he had to learn and he had to grow like we do, okay? But they're taking that idea and applying it to God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit in total, that God's whole essence has chosen to limit himself so that we would have a greater role with our free will, that we help to shape the future, and God prefers that over him being totally sovereign, with knowing all things in advance. This is like open theism. So openness, open theism, neo-theism, free will theism has many names. That's the basic idea. And this is now the current fad among some evangelicals. So this is kind of close to home. This is within our circles of so-called evangelical people who have this view, and it's growing right now. So this is quite radical that God does not now know all about the future.
He was temporarily finite in the sense in Christ Jesus as the Son. It's kind of
it kind of borrows from like what happened with God the Son in Christ, but it's kind of magnified to the whole being of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
And forever.
At least until Second Coming. Yeah. So anyway, that's just what that means. We could talk about that more, but let's just move on. Look under finite Godism. I have personal experience with this one. I was a member, without my knowing it, of a liberal Christian church. Anybody else ever have that in your background where you didn't know much about theology and you joined a liberal Christian church? Anybody else besides me? Not alone here, aren't I? Thanks a lot. Is this payback for making fun of Baptist churches? Is this payback for them?
Yeah.
I love Baptist churches. To the camera, I love Baptist churches. And I do love Baptist churches. But you see, since you're the majority, I have to tease you, so. I have to. I have no choice. Okay, liberal Christianity, which I was a part of for a while and didn't realize it after my conversion. Similar to the above, that is liberal Judaism, God is not able to do certain types of miracles, and Jesus did not physically resurrect. That's one reason why I finally left that church, because I found out the pastor did not teach and preach the resurrection of Christ as a physical resurrection. So when I realized that was the pastor who believed that, and I was growing enough in my faith to know that that was important, I left.
What kind of church was that?
It's very common, in fact, in America. In Europe. There are many, many churches in America that do not believe that Jesus rose from the dead physically.
What kind of church?
Called liberal Christianity.
What kind of remains like that?
Well, this church is good and bad. This denomination has good and bad. I was with the bad one, obviously. The denomination is called Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And there are good churches in that denomination that preach the resurrection correctly. But some churches in that denomination, and there are many, United Methodist Church is another one. There are good churches in the United Methodist, and there are some very liberal ones. You can find within large denominations liberal as well as non-liberal. Okay? So within many different denominations, you can find churches just like this, and it's quite common. You'd be surprised how common this is in America.
Like Sadducees.
Sort of like Sadducees. Who didn't believe in the resurrection. That was why they were so sad. You see? Sorry. In case you hadn't heard it before, and for the viewers watching DVD, maybe they didn't hear that before. Now, why this is, I think, really a real reason why the churches went this way and became doubters of the physical resurrection. Back in the 1900s, what we just came out of, the 20th century, what was becoming intimidating to the Christian church, which began in 1859. If you know your history about science, a famous person, Darwin, wrote a book in 1859, what's it called? Species? Origin of Species, okay. Then by the 1900s, that view of Darwinian evolution became very commonplace in American education, 20th century. So a lot of Christian churches, I think, in hindsight, were intimidated by this view that supposedly was scientific and supposedly factual, and a lot of churches were like, well, how do we answer our members' questions about origins and so forth? And I think a lot of them went to, out of intimidation, what's called theistic evolution. They could still believe in God, but they could also accommodate to this supposedly scientific view that was becoming quite honored in American life, called Darwinian evolution. So they kind of accommodated or compromised, I think, from my point of view, with a belief that was intimidating them. But you know, the last 10, 20 years have been a great time to be in apologetics, which is one of my areas. And the amount of knowledge that defends the gospel, defends the scripture, the last 20 years has been remarkable. Now we can go toe-to-toe, fist to fist, so to speak, in a boxing match competition with evolutionists, especially naturalistic evolutionists, and we can win easily, I think, in a fair court of law, arguing our case, because we know so much more now about evidence for creation, such as DNA and things like that didn't exist before. So anyway, that's what happened, I think, is they accommodated, they compromised with intimidating so-called scientific views. But now we know better, I think, and we don't have to compromise at all, but maintain creationism, I think, is the proper view. Okay, look under, where shall we go next? Look under deism. We'll finish with deism. Well, I gave you a handout on deism. Deism is, that thing, be nice. It's the belief that, God made the world, He made me, but I'm on my own now. I want to be happy to do what I want to do. But you call upon God only if you what? If you need Him, if you're in trouble. When you get sick, when there's a problem, then all of a sudden you want God to intervene. But according to deism, He doesn't intervene. So we're really on our own there. That tells us that there. And I think we'll add one more to close with. Islam. Since Islam is now the fastest growing what? Religion. Do you realize that? According to statistics, Islam is the fastest growing religion. It's growing faster than we are as Christianity. Islam is the fastest growing religion.
By birth, not family.
Whatever, by birth, yeah. Well, whatever. However it's growing, it's the fastest growing religion. So this is becoming, of course, since 9/11, it's more up front in our minds since 9/11 happened. But keep in mind what Islam really is: a single person God. And I put there a funny looking word: a single person God of Arabs. / etc. Why do you think I said He's the God of Arabs? Not only, there's also / etc., but I put first God of Arabs. Well, okay, they go back to Ishmael, not Isaac, and Ishmael settled in the Arabian area, according to the tradition. But also, the Quran, the Word of God, the Quran. Guess why I say Arabic, or why Arab? Well, the Quran supposedly is written by God in heaven in Arabic. And He has an actual physical Bible in heaven. And it's in Arabic. That's why it's forbidden to translate it. Now, you can find translations, but according to the official Islam, you cannot translate the Quran. It is meant to be permanently in Arabic. It's a holy language. So that kind of implies that God is an Arab, or favors Arabic, or He's an Arabic God, Arabic-speaking God. However you define it, it makes God look like He's an Arab, or an Arabic God. Whereas, this is in Hebrew and Greek, but God is not Hebrew or Greek, and doesn't really depend upon Hebrew or Greek. He can use English or Chinese to get his point across, which I think is more what a God would do, a God who made the earth. But in this view, really Islam presents more of an Arab God, so to speak.
Orthodox Judaism believes the same thing about Hebrew.
Perhaps so. So it says there that this God requires human law-keeping and acceptance of Muhammad as the greatest prophet as the way of salvation. And yet they say that they are connected to the Old Testament and New Testament. They accept parts of both, the Old Testament and New Testament. Of course, we have the view that it's by faith alone and God alone as a way of salvation. Yet they twist that and go a different direction. So that's quite controversial. Okay, we're going to close this session and then come back with one final session tonight.